How many of you posted a photo online today? It was one of 14 billion images that's shared online every single day. And yet 2 trillion images were created in 2025 alone. That's 2 trillion decisions about what to show, what to hide, who to include, and who to erase. I want to talk about what it means to shift that lens. Because when my son was 1 week old, I learned exactly what it costs when we don't. I'm a photographer. I grew up with a camera in my hands, and I wanted to go to school for art, but I didn't because I believed what I thought my dad believed, that art doesn't pay the bills. So I studied biology, graduated with honors, got a good job, and then my dad died. And it was just days later, I learned he had taken my high school drawing, had it professionally framed and hung up in his office for everybody to see. That moment shifted everything for me. It wasn't his expectations that held me back. It was my story about them. And in photography, whoever holds the camera decides the story. For years, I lived a story I thought he wanted, not the one he actually did. And the story you believe about yourself, about anybody, depends entirely on who tells it. So what happens when we change who tells the story, especially when it comes to young people? You've all probably looked at a photo that's moved you, but the person in it, they might not have had a say in how they were seen, but the photographer sure did. Your response was built on their one choice, one perspective. And I know this because I've made the same choices in photography. My son is a healthy, thriving 8-year-old, but he was born with a congenital heart condition, a kind that is lethal to newborns. And when he was 1 week old, they strapped his first heart monitor to his tiny chest. And I photographed it. I created dozens of photos that day. Some he's calm and peaceful. Others he's curious and unaware, but the one that I shared, he's crying as the tape pulled off his tiny chest. I chose that moment because I needed people to know how scared I was, how alone and terrified I felt, but that was my story, not his. And I decided without thinking what moment would define him for all who saw. I used his pain to tell my story. That's the power we hold when we use the camera. Every image is a decision. And these decisions, this pattern of single perspective storytelling, it's defined photography's entire history. Who's held the camera? Mostly people in positions of power, those with access, photographing those without. Over 80% of photojournalists are male. 52% identify as white and only 1% as Black. In 2018, National Geographic admitted their entire archive reflected the biases of those behind the lens. Single narratives have consequences. They define how communities are perceived, they reinforce who matter, and they erase complexity. And we're raising a generation that's fluent in sharing images, but they have no idea how much power they're holding. 1 year and 5 months after my dad died, I decided it was time to write my own narrative. And I finally went to school for photography. I learned exposure, composition, how to get the shot. I thought being a good photographer meant having a vision and executing it perfectly. But over time, my understanding of our shared colonial history reshaped how I saw photography as a collaborative tool to question whose stories are being told. My good friend and educator, Aaron Buckman, and I created a photography project in partnership with community and high school students called Debwewen. Debwewen means to speak the truth from your own place in Anishinaabemowin, honoring that we all have our own truth, and that story is as personal as it is universal. Think about how rarely we practice that, how often we show up ready to share what we know, but without making space for what someone else lives. We worked with high school students in Northeastern Ontario to craft stories they wanted to share through photography. I thought I was there to teach them, but they didn't need me to make a good image. It was clear in the first week that my expertise was in the way. The best images came from stepping back, from letting them lead, from listening. I'm not going to lie, that was really hard. I'd built my whole identity on being good at this. One morning, we met a student at a remote train station, and he was reconnecting with his culture, learning songs from his family, and he started to sing and drum on the train platform. And we just waited. We didn't rush, we didn't direct, we just waited until the moment felt true to him. And something potent unfolded. Because we were patient and we honored his vision, this moment happened. A train car rolled by, and on it were the words, "Every child matters." Our collective call and commitment to truth and reconciliation, ensuring every child's freedom and well-being matter. That moment couldn't have been planned. It happened because we were patient and we honored his vision. Because you can't extract someone's story and then call it collaboration. As students listened more, their understandings evolved, and they started to recognize the weight and responsibility of the images they were creating. For years, we worked alongside them, and we brought their work together for a few community gatherings. Students stood in front of their work, surrounded by their community, and owned their narrative. Parents looked at images their kids created and saw them differently. The youth created it, and the community received it. That's what visual diversity does. It doesn't just reflect reality, it reduces bias by showing us multiple truths instead of one narrative. One image repeated becomes the truth, but multiple truths, your brain has to process the fact that more than one story can be true at the same time. And in that pause, bias breaks down. That's when I understood this. It's not photography as extraction. This is photography as relationship. When you teach a young person they have the right to shape their own narrative, they stop being the subject and they become the storyteller. So the next time you're about to post a photo of a young person, ask them, how do you want to be seen in this? And listen. If their answer is no, honor that. You might be wondering why I didn't include a photo of my 8-year-old in this talk. It's because I asked him what he wanted. He took his time, paused, and said no. That pause, that's where the shift begins. So what if at work you paused and asked whose perspective is missing? Because when everybody sees it the same way, it's a blind spot. At school or in the classroom, what if you listened before you handed over the camera? You can't teach agency while you're controlling the frame. And at home, what if you asked your child, how do you want to be seen in this? Because your fear of judgment shouldn't override their right to choose. Every image we create now becomes the archive that future generations will inherit. And if we keep adding to it the same way, we'll keep repeating patterns that have distorted representation for years. But if we shift the lens, if we choose collaboration over control, decide consent matters more than a highlight reel, and teach youth their stories belong to them, we'll change more than just photography. We'll change who's remembered and what that future archive looks like. I think about my dad and that framed art project and the story I lived for years and how letting it go led me here, to photography, to collaboration, to these youth and their truths. I can't change the years that I carried that story, but I can change what I do next, and so can you. Pause before you post. Ask before you share. Give them the choice. Because that's the world I want my son to grow up in, where every young person's story belongs to them. So let's shift the lens together. Thank you. Yeah.